The caustic air of Proxima B9 burned Alaxi's lungs as she dragged herself through the smoking remains of what had once been the front line. The battle had moved on hours ago, leaving only the dead and those soon to join them. Her six-fingered hand clutched at the rocky soil, pulling her broken body forward inch by excruciating inch. Where her right leg should have been, there was only a ragged stump, hastily cauterized by her own plasma pistol in a desperate act of survival. The memory of the explosion still echoed in her mind. The pressure plate she hadn't seen, the blinding flash, the sensation of being thrown like a discarded toy. "Useless now," the battalion commander had said, not even looking at her as he ordered the retreat. "Leave her. We don't waste resources on damaged units." That was the way of the Vrexian military, efficiency above all. Compassion was weakness. The wounded were burdens, better to die with honor than live with imperfection. Blood the color of amber seeped through her makeshift bandage. The pain had begun to dull, which Alaxi knew was a bad sign. Her translucent skin had taken on a grayish hue, the bioluminescent patterns that normally pulsed across her body growing dimmer with each passing moment. "So this is how it ends," she whispered to the empty battlefield, her voice like wind through crystal. Her large, faceted eyes, once bright violet, now clouded as the light began to fade from her vision. The sound of footsteps made her freeze. Instinctively, she reached for her weapon, but found only empty air where her holster should have been. "Don't move," came a voice, speaking the common trade language of the sector. Not Vrexian, human. Alaxi's hearts raced in her chest. Humans were the enemy, barbarians, unpredictable and violent according to Vrexian propaganda. She had never seen one up close before the war. Now she would die at their hands. "I said don't move. You're making the bleeding worse." The human came into view, kneeling beside her. Male, she thought, though human gender differences were subtle to Vrexian eyes. He wore the distinctive white and red armband of their medical corps. Dust and blood covered his uniform, his face streaked with grime beneath a helmet that seemed too large for his head. "Military?" he asked, eyes scanning her tattered uniform. "Yes," Alaxi managed, her translator implant converting her crystalline speech to something the human could understand. "4th Expansion Battalion, not that it matters now." The human's face did something strange then, the corners of his mouth turned downward, his brow furrowed. "They left you here to die." It wasn't a question, but Alaxi answered anyway. "I am damaged, no longer efficient." "That's bullshit," the human said, a word her translator couldn't quite capture. He was already opening a pack strapped to his back, pulling out supplies. "I'm Theo, Lieutenant Theodore Maxwell, UNMC combat medic." "Why tell me your name? I am your enemy." Alaxi's voice wavered as darkness crept at the edges of her consciousness. "Not right now, you're not," Theo replied, injecting something into her shoulder. Almost immediately, the pain began to recede. "Right now, you're just someone who needs help." "My people would not do the same for you," she said, unable to understand why this human wasn't finishing her off or simply walking away. Theo was busy examining her ruined leg, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Yeah, well, maybe that's the difference between us. Hold still, this is going to hurt." He did something to her leg that made Alaxi cry out, a sound like shattering glass. But when the pain subsided, the bleeding had stopped. "Listen, I can't treat you properly here," he said, glancing around at the exposed battlefield. "My orders are to retrieve our wounded and leave enemy casualties, but—" He paused, seeming to struggle with himself. "I didn't sign up to be a medic to let people die when I can help them." "Why?" Alaxi asked, genuinely confused. "I am nothing to you." "Because that's what makes us human," he replied simply. Then, to her shock, he was lifting her, cradling her broken body against his chest. "I've got an outpost 2 clicks east. It's not much, but it's got supplies. More importantly, it's got prototype biosynth equipment." "Biosynth? We're going to get you a new leg," Theo said with determination that Alaxi couldn't comprehend. "And then we'll figure out what to do next." As he carried her across the battlefield, avoiding craters and the occasional unexploded ordnance, Alaxi studied his face. There was something there she had never seen in her own commanders, something her species would consider dangerous weakness, but which stirred something inside her. "My designation is Combat Engineer Alaxi Vrinzal," she said finally, as the pain medication began to make her lightheaded. "Nice to meet you, Alaxi," Theo replied, adjusting his grip to keep her comfortable. Let's get you somewhere safe. As consciousness began to slip away, Alaxi realized that for the first time since the mine had taken her leg, she felt something unexpected. Hope. In the distance, the sounds of war continued. But for this moment, in the arms of her enemy, Alaxi found a strange peace she had never known among her own kind. The outpost was little more than a prefabricated shelter nestled into the side of a rocky outcropping, camouflaged to blend with the alien landscape. Inside, medical equipment hummed alongside tactical terminals and communication arrays. Theo had called it nothing much, but to Alaxi, who had never seen human technology up close, it was a marvel of ingenuity. She drifted in and out of consciousness as Theo worked. The biosynth machine whirred and clicked, scanning the structure of her Vrexian physiology, adapting human prosthetic protocols to alien biology. Her species' regenerative abilities made the grafting possible, but the pain was beyond anything she had experienced. "I'm sorry," Theo murmured each time she screamed, his hands steady despite the anguish in his eyes. "I'm working with limited anesthetic. Your metabolism processes it too quickly." 3 days passed in a haze of pain and strange, vivid dreams. When Alaxi finally regained full consciousness, she found herself lying on a cot, a thin blanket covering her lower body. Hesitantly, she lifted the covering and stared in wonder at what she saw. Where her missing limb had been was now a sleek synthetic appendage, its surface a blend of metallic components and translucent sections that pulsed with artificial bioluminescence matching her natural patterns. It wasn't Vrexian technology. It was something new, a hybrid of human ingenuity and adaptation to her alien form. "It's responding to your neural patterns," Theo said, noticing she was awake. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd barely slept. "The biosynth bonded with your nervous system. Try to move it." Tentatively, Alaxi focused on the new limb. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a slight whirring sound, the foot flexed. A gasp escaped her, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "It works," she whispered, experimentally bending the knee. "How did you know how to adapt it to my physiology?" Theo smiled wearily. "I didn't exactly. The biosynth did most of the work. It's experimental tech designed to adapt to unknown alien biology. I just guided the process." He paused, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Command doesn't know I have access to it. It was supposed to be for high-ranking officers only." The implications weren't lost on Alaxi. "You've risked much for an enemy." "I've been calling and exploring reconnaissance zones for the past 3 days," he admitted. "They're getting suspicious. I missed 2 check-ins." Alaxi struggled to sit up, her new leg responding awkwardly but effectively. "Why would you jeopardize yourself for me?" Theo busied himself checking her vital signs, avoiding her multifaceted eyes. "Because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing is a luxury of peace," Alaxi countered, her translator struggling to convey the complex Vrexian concept. "We are at war." "Wars end," Theo said simply. "What we do during them defines who we are after." Something inside Alaxi shifted at those words, a concept alien to Vrexian military doctrine. The idea that actions in war could be guided by principles beyond victory was revolutionary to her. Over the next week, as Theo helped her adapt to the synthetic limb, they developed a routine. Mornings were dedicated to physical therapy, afternoons to rest and recovery. In the evenings, they shared meals from Theo's rations, supplemented with local flora he'd determined was safe for her consumption. "Why did you become a medic?" she asked one evening, watching him adjust the sensitivity in her new leg. His touch was clinical but gentle, something she found increasingly distracting. "My father was a doctor," he replied. "He always said healing was the highest calling." His fingers paused on the synthetic join where metal met her iridescent skin. "When the war started, I figured soldiers would need healers more than civilians." The communication unit crackled to life, making them both freeze. "Lieutenant Maxwell, this is command. Respond immediately. Your position has been compromised. Retreat to Base Alpha. Unknown hostiles approaching your location. ETA 30 minutes. Theo's face hardened as he rushed to the tactical display. "They found us, either my command or yours." He turned to Alaxi, conflict evident in his expression. "Can you walk? We need to move." As she stood, testing her weight on the new limb, Alaxi realized something that terrified her more than the approaching danger. She didn't want to return to her people. Not after experiencing something she'd never known among the Vrexian military. Compassion without purpose, kindness without calculation. "Where will we go?" she asked, the "we" slipping out before she could consider its implications. Theo's surprise at her inclusive pronoun quickly gave way to determination. "There's a ravine 2 kilometers north. We can hide there until we figure something out." As they gathered supplies, their hands brushed, sending an unexpected current through Alaxi's body. Their eyes met, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them, something that transcended species, duty, and the war that had brought them together. They slipped out of the outpost just as the first scout ships appeared on the horizon, moving as one into the alien wilderness, united by circumstance and increasingly by choice. The ravine proved to be more than a simple geological feature. It was a vast network of caves, warmed by thermal vents and illuminated by native bioluminescent fungi that reminded Alaxi of home. They established a makeshift camp deep within the system, far from the prying sensors of either military. Theo's communication device occasionally crackled with transmissions, orders to return, warnings of court-martial, declarations that he was presumed killed in action. After the third day, he switched it off entirely. "No going back now," he said with a wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You have sacrificed your position, your future," Alaxi observed. "For what purpose?" Theo was quiet for a long moment, tending the small heat generator that kept the cave hospitable for both their physiologies. "I'm not sure anymore. At first, it was just about saving a life. Now," he looked at her, really looked, as though seeing beyond the alien features to something deeper. "Now I think it's about proving something." "Proving what?" "That there's another way, that we don't have to be defined by this war." Communication between them improved daily. Alaxi's translator implant had begun adapting to Theo's speech patterns, and he in turn was learning the basics of her crystalline language. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, covering everything from tactical doctrine to philosophy, from childhood memories to dreams of peace. Physical therapy continued, Alaxi growing stronger and more adept with her synthetic limb. Theo's hands, always professional at first, began to linger during adjustments. The contact sent strange, pleasant sensations cascading through her nervous system. She found herself manufacturing small malfunctions in the biosynth leg just to feel his touch. One night, as they sat side by side watching the phosphorescent patterns on the cave ceiling, Alaxi gathered her courage. "My people do not touch casually," she said, her voice like crystal in the quiet cave. "Physical contact is reserved for medical necessity or—" She hesitated, her bioluminescent patterns flickering with emotion her face couldn't express. "Or," Theo prompted gently, "intimate connections, those we choose as life partners." Theo went very still. "I didn't know. I'm sorry if I've been inappropriate with the therapy." "You misunderstand," Alaxi said, her 6-fingered hand tentatively reaching for his 5. "I have begun to anticipate your touch." Their fingers intertwined, alien and human, different yet somehow fitting together. The simple contact sent waves of sensation through Alaxi's body, her bioluminescence brightening in patterns that betrayed her arousal to anyone who knew how to read them. Theo evidently did, his pupils dilated, his breath quickening. "Alaxi, I don't want to misinterpret. This is uncharted territory." "Yes," she agreed, her free hand tracing the contours of his face, fascinated by the alien softness of his skin. "But is not all exploration driven by the desire to discover new worlds?" What began as tentative exploration became a passionate discovery of one another. Their anatomies were different, yet complementary in ways neither had anticipated. Theo's gentle strength matched perfectly with Alaxi's lithe flexibility. Her bioluminescence responded to his touch, creating patterns of light that guided him to places of pleasure she hadn't known existed. His soft sounds of desire translated perfectly despite their different biologies. Their union transcended the physical. It was a defiance of everything that had divided their species, a testament to the possibility of connection across the gulf of evolution and war. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Theo traced the luminescent patterns along her arm. "What happens now?" he asked softly. "Now we have committed an act of revolution," Alaxi replied. "By Vrexian law, I am a traitor. By human standards, you are likely the same." "Worth it," he said with a smile that made her hearts accelerate. Neither of them noticed the small drone that hovered at the cave entrance, its sensors recording everything before silently retreating into the night. The attack came at dawn, when the thermal signatures of the cave system were at their most distinct against the cold morning air. Explosive charges shook the outer chambers, sending cascades of stone and dust through the network. Behind them came troops, both human and Vrexian, in an unprecedented joint operation. Traitors unite enemies, Alaxi observed grimly as they gathered what supplies they could. Her new leg performed flawlessly as they fled deeper into the cave system, using passages too narrow for armored pursuers. "They're working together to hunt us," Theo marveled, equal parts horrified and amused. "Maybe we should get credit for creating the first cross-species cooperation in this war." "Their cooperation ends once we are captured," Alaxi replied. "For my people, intimate relations with an enemy species is punishable by public vivisection." Theo's face hardened. "That's not happening, not while I'm breathing." They emerged from the caves into a vast underground chamber that neither military force seemed to know existed. Ancient stone structures suggested it had once been inhabited, perhaps by the original sentient species of Proxima B9, long extinct when humans and Vrexians had arrived to fight over the mineral-rich world. "We can't stay here forever," Theo said, examining their dwindling supplies. "And we can't outrun both militaries indefinitely." Alaxi's faceted eyes caught the reflection of a distant light, something artificial that didn't belong in this ancient place. "There," she pointed. "That is not part of the ruins." Investigation revealed a maintenance access to an automated mining operation, one that belonged to neither human nor Vrexian forces, but to the Galactic Commerce Guild, a neutral entity that maintained operations across contested worlds through strict non-interference policies. "The Guild employs all species," Alaxi said, hope brightening her bioluminescent patterns. "They might shelter us or at least provide transport off-world." Accessing the maintenance tunnel required Alaxi's six-fingered dexterity combined with Theo's knowledge of universal mechanical systems, a perfect synthesis of their respective skills. Together, they descended into the sterile, efficient world of Guild automation. They had barely sealed the access hatch behind them when explosive charges rocked the chamber they just left. Through a monitoring system, they watched in horror as human and Vrexian troops flooded the ancient ruins, methodically destroying everything in their search. "They're not just trying to capture us," Theo realized. "They're trying to erase any evidence we existed. A relationship such as ours threatens the narrative of irreconcilable differences that sustains the war," Alaxi said. "If soldiers knew cross-species empathy was possible." "The war machine breaks down," Theo finished. They made their way through the automated facility, avoiding the occasional Guild inspector drone, until they reached a small transport bay. A cargo shuttle waited, programmed for its regular run to the Guild's orbital station. As they prepared to board, alarms blared throughout the facility. On a nearby monitor, they watched Guild security confronting the military forces that had breached the perimeter, invoking neutrality protocols and demanding withdrawal. "Now or never," Theo said, helping Alaxi into the shuttle. Her synthetic leg had begun to malfunction under the stress, the connection points inflamed from overuse. As they initiated the launch sequence, the shuttle bay doors unexpectedly sealed. A Guild security officer appeared on the communication screen, their species indeterminate beneath environmental gear. "Unscheduled departure detected. Identify yourselves." Alaxi and Theo exchanged glances, then Theo stepped forward. "We seek sanctuary, a human and a Vrexian who have chosen peace over war. The joint military forces of both our species seek to execute us for this choice." The officer was silent for a long moment. "Interesting," they finally said. "The Guild maintains strict neutrality in the human-Vrexian conflict." "We're not asking you to take sides in the war," Alaxi interjected. "We're asking you to recognize our right to choose something beyond it." Another pause, longer this time. Then unexpectedly the officer laughed, a strange, modulated sound through their environmental suit. "You know, in 300 standard years of Guild service, this is the first time I've encountered anything truly novel. Wait for escort." The bay doors reopened, revealing not military forces but Guild security personnel. They were escorted not to a brig but to the station commander's quarters. "What do you think they'll do with us?" Theo asked quietly as they waited. Alaxi's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in what had become a gesture of shared strength. I don't know, but whatever comes, we face it together. The orbital station hung like a jewel above Proxima B9, its gleaming guild insignia visible even from the surface on clear days. From the observation deck where they now stood, Alaxi and Theo watched shuttles coming and going, a constant flow of commerce that continued regardless of the war raging on the planet below. 6 months had passed since their escape. 6 months of debriefings, medical examinations, and endless questions from guild xenobiologists fascinated by both Alaxi's biosynth leg and the physiological compatibility that allowed their intimate relationship. Specimen X-117 shows remarkable adaptation, a Calixian researcher noted, examining the latest scan of Alaxi's leg, where Theo's human-designed biosynth technology had begun integrating more permanently with her Vrexian biology. Her name is Alaxi, Theo corrected firmly. After months of this, his patience for being treated as research subjects was wearing thin. The station commander, a towering Andolian named Vres, dismissed the researchers with a wave of their upper limbs. You must forgive their enthusiasm. Your situation is unprecedented in guild records. We didn't come here to be studied, Alaxi said, her translator now perfectly calibrated to her emotional states. We came seeking sanctuary. And you have received it, Vres countered. But surely you understand the scientific value of your union. 2 species at war for 20 years, physiologically compatible enough for intimate relations. The implications are significant. Theo stepped closer to Alaxi, his hand finding the small of her back in what had become a habitual gesture of support. The implications being that this war is based on manufactured hatred rather than any real incompatibility. Vres's compound eyes shifted in what might have been amusement. Precisely why both your governments have placed substantial bounties on your capture. The Guild has declined all such overtures, of course. Our neutrality is absolute. Neutrality isn't the same as imprisonment, Theo said. We've been confined to this station for half a year. Protection, not confinement, Vres corrected. But perhaps it is time for the next phase, walk with me. They followed the commander through the station's central promenade, where beings from dozens of species conducted business, ate in cafes, and went about their lives in peaceful coexistence. At the far end was a section Theo, and Alaxi had never been permitted to enter, a residential zone. The Guild maintains several autonomous settlements, Vres explained as they approached. Places where those who wish to live beyond the politics of their home worlds can exist in peace, contributing to Guild operations in exchange for protection and autonomy. The doors slid open to reveal a thriving community unlike anything either of them had imagined. Humans worked alongside Vrexians, along with a dozen other species. Children, some clearly of mixed heritage, played in communal gardens. The air was filled with a cacophony of languages, all somehow harmonizing. Welcome to Haven, Vres said. One of our most successful autonomous zones, and should you choose to accept your new home. Alaxi's bioluminescence flared with emotion. There are other Vrexian human couples here. 3 at present, Vres confirmed. Along with many other combinations once thought impossible, war creates strange reflexive hatreds. Commerce, however, requires cooperation. The Guild has long known what your governments deny. Species differences are rarely obstacles to coexistence when profit is involved. They were given quarters overlooking the central garden, a small apartment, but one designed with both their physiologies in mind. That night, as they stood on their private balcony watching the lights of ships departing for distant worlds, Theo took Alaxi's 6-fingered hand in his. It's not what I imagined when I found you on that battlefield, he admitted. But then, I hadn't imagined any of this. Alaxi's free hand traced the line of his jaw, a gesture that had become intimate shorthand between them. In Vrexian philosophy, there is a concept called Kavrex, the path that emerges only by walking it. There was no way to predict this journey because it could only exist through our choices. Poetry from a combat engineer? Theo teased, pulling her closer. Evolution from a combat medic, she countered, her bioluminescence rippling in patterns he now recognized as affection. Below them, in the garden, a human child and a young Vrexian were playing some hybrid game that seemed to incorporate elements from both cultures. Their laughter, one warm and rolling, the other like tinkling crystal, blended perfectly in the recycled air of the station. "They need to see us," Alexei said suddenly. "Not just here in this sanctuary, but everywhere, if others knew what was possible between our species." Theo nodded slowly. "The Guild has communications networks. Propaganda doesn't only work for war, it can work for peace too." In the months that followed, their story, carefully documented and distributed through Guild trade channels, began to spread. Other mixed couples emerged from hiding. Questions were raised in both human and Vrexian societies about the true nature of their conflict. 1 year to the day after Theo had found Alexei bleeding on the battlefield, they stood together before Haven's community, exchanging vows in a ceremony that honored both their traditions. Alexei wore intricate crystalline ornaments that amplified her bioluminescence, while Theo, dressed in the formal blues of his medical service, reclaimed not as a symbol of military allegiance, but as a reminder of the oath to heal that had brought them together. "The synthetic becomes real," Alexei whispered as they completed the final ritual, a reference to her leg that now functioned so perfectly it was difficult to distinguish from her natural limb. "And enemies become lovers," Theo added, proving that humanity isn't just a human trait. On the surface below, peace talks had finally begun, tentative, fragile, but real. Whether their story had been catalyst or coincidence didn't matter. What mattered was the truth they had discovered on a battlefield where one had been left to die and the other had chosen to save. That compassion could bridge any difference, and love could flourish in the most unlikely soil. As the celebration continued around them, Alexei took Theo's hand and guided it to her abdomen, where the faintest bioluminescent pulse, different from her normal patterns, had just begun to appear. His eyes widened in understanding. The xenobiologists had theorized it might be possible, with Guild medical assistance, but to see the proof glowing beneath her translucent skin. "A new chapter begins," she said, her voice like music in the joy-filled air. "A new species," he whispered in wonder. "Neither human nor Vrexian, but something better than both." Beyond the viewport, Proxima B9 continued its rotation, the battle lines now still, the weapons silent. And in their place, something unexpected had taken root, a future neither side had imagined possible until a wounded alien and a human medic had chosen compassion over conflict, healing over harm, and love over the easy certainties of war.